Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. Thanks for having me. So I'm Janina, and as Lorenzo mentioned, I just finished the Master's in Economics and Policy of Energy and the Environment last year. And I wrote my dissertation on gender equality and social inclusion, or as you can see here in short, GESI in energy planning in Kenya. My supervisor was Dr. Julia Tomai, and my thesis was part of the Climate Compatible Growth Program. Here you can see the logo on the right, and I also work for CCG now. So I'm going to first introduce the CCG program, and then about my dissertation, explain what is the concept of GESI and why is it important to think about GESI and energy access and energy planning. I'm going to describe my methods and my data collection, and then present some key findings. So the Climate Compatible Growth Program is a research program funded by the UK's FCDO, and we're looking to help low and middle income countries meet their development priorities while unlocking investment in green energy and sustainable transport, and also achieving the SDGs. And CCG is a consortium of several UK universities and research institutions, among them UCL, and we work in 4 partner countries at the moment, and one of them is Kenya. So looking at GESI and energy planning, I first wanted to give a brief definition of what is gender equality and social inclusion. So gender equality means equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities for women, men, boys, and girls, which means that any discrimination based on if someone is born female or male is removed in an ideal world. And social inclusion refers to the process of ensuring that everyone has the same rights and opportunities to take part in society, and especially thinking about marginalized groups which are excluded from participation in society in certain contexts. So different marginalized groups would be people with disabilities, women and girls, ethnic minorities, the youth, the elderly, people with a refugee background, the poor or the deprived, and also the LGBTIQ community. So looking at specifically the case of Kenya, why is it relevant to look at GESI and in energy planning and energy access? So marginalized groups access and use energy differently than the mainstream consumer. They have special needs when it comes to energy. So for example, in Kenya, especially in rural areas, there is traditional gender roles, which means that women have less decision-making power over household resources. They're the ones collecting the firewood, and they're the ones cooking, which exposes them to more indoor pollution. Yeah, it's just that men and women in these scenarios use energy significantly differently, which means that these kind of specific needs of women need to be addressed and accounted for in energy planning. There is also stigma about disabled people or elderly people as well, which may mean that they can live hidden away, which makes it harder for them to access energy. Or thinking about people with a refugee background who live in camps, where often the energy supply is not as well organized as in other places, or the energy needs are sometimes neglected. And we could go on and talk about other marginalized groups as well, but this is just to exemplify the special needs that marginalized groups have when it comes to energy. And unfortunately, energy planning is too often designed in mainstream and top-down approaches, which don't account for such special needs. So in my thesis, in the research, we were interested in finding out to what extent GESI is being considered in energy planning in Kenya at the moment. So kind of the status quo was the first research objective. And then the second objective was to kind of identify improvement points to better include GESI in energy planning. So we interviewed 19 stakeholders in the energy sector. So these were energy decision makers, for example, from the national government or the county governments, but also from private sector and different NGOs. And we asked questions like, what do you understand by gender equality and social inclusion? So what is your definition of the term? We also asked which of the following marginalized groups are currently not considered in energy planning, and then we showed the image here on the right with the different pictures for the different marginalized groups, and then people could choose which ones are not being considered at the moment. And then we also asked them other questions: what could be done to improve the consideration of GESI in energy access and energy planning? And so based on the interviews, I identified some key findings on the status quo of consideration of GESI and energy planning at the moment. The first one being that energy policies and planning do increasingly include the needs of women, but other marginalized groups, which I just mentioned before, receive less attention. And the second key finding was that the county implementation of such policies is still lacking. It's rather slow, and it differs between the counties in the sense that the capacities in the different counties for implementation and for driving GESI inclusive energy planning is quite different. And then also based on the interviews, I identified 6 action points for improvement. So for improving the consideration of GESI in energy planning. The first one being to give all marginalized groups equal attention in planning. So this is without compromising the progress that has been made on including women's needs in planning. But it's essentially about leaving no one behind and acknowledging that there may be synergies in addressing the different marginalized groups as the characteristics of the different groups may intersect. And so by acknowledging that all marginalized groups have special needs, this helps to leave no one behind in energy planning. The second point is about addressing the underlying discriminatory structures. So this is essentially about changing traditional gender roles, improving women's decision-making power on household resources, and also empowering them economically. So supporting them to pursue male-dominated careers, for example, in the energy field. That point is also about fighting stigma and discrimination of other marginalized groups, like, for example, the elderly or the disabled people, and also about addressing poverty and high costs for energy consumers and supplying the remote living people with energy. The third action point I identified was to drive the implementation of the policies. So this means increasing county staff capacities for GESI and also improving the collaboration between the different departments and actors, as some of my interviews have mentioned that some departments may work in silos and not communicate, which isn't helpful when you try to integrate gender and energy. And then the fourth point is about pursuing more participatory planning. Some interviews have mentioned that it would be great to include more stakeholders earlier on in the process. And then what also has been mentioned to be really important is stronger policy making. So kind of that political will to actually drive the inclusion of GESI in planning, and then also drive implementation from both the national and also the county governments. And then the last point is about increasing funding, so the financial capital to actually put the different policies in planning and fund the different staff capacities, for example. It was important to me to highlight in my thesis that this is not a hierarchical order of which points should be addressed first, but that it will be dependent on the context of each project and each county maybe, or each city, which of these points should be addressed first. Yeah, thank you. And I look forward to any questions.